Welcome to Green Time. I'm host Don Fitz. This episode we're going to be talking about Ozark National Scenic Riverways. But before we get into our discussion, let's take a look at a great DVD that was produced by Tom Malkowicz. Hi, welcome back to Green Time. I'm host Don Fitz. With me, I have a couple of guests who are great experts on the Current River and the Jacks Fork River. I have Greg Iffrig, and Greg, you're with LAD Foundation. Do I have that correct?
Correct. Leo A. Dry's foundation.
Leo Dry, and certainly there's a lot of people in St. Louis who are familiar with Leo Dry, and all of us work towards natural areas in the state. And I have with me John Hickey, who is with the Sierra Club. Do I have that correct?
Exactly, Don.
And I think most people know what the Sierra Club is.
I hope so.
Okay, great. Well, now, what are some of the? We saw the DVD about the movie, the brief movie that Tom Malkowicz made that shows some great scenes of the Current River. Now, what's the story of the Current River? Has that always been a national riverways, or who helped get the Current River protected like it is today?
You know, it'd be interesting to talk just for a bit about some of the people that helped make the river famous. Missouri's a river state.
Lots of rivers in Missouri.
Lots of rivers. And if there is one that we could single out as being the prettiest and the most important, the Current River is a standout.
So you think if viewers haven't been to the Current River, they ought to think about going to the Current River?
It's a must-see place. Famous for its springs, largest springs in North America. Cool, clear water, great floats, great fishing, swimming, boating, hiking. But it became famous because it was a well-used stream for fishing. Early flat bottom boats, john boats. And people could go.
Yeah, when I came to Missouri, somebody said, "Do you want to rent a john boat?" And I said, "What in the world is a john boat?"
It's a stable, flat-bottom boat, so they could easily navigate the river going up and down. And people would go down to the current and hire a guide and fish the river. And it's just a beautiful place and a wonderful place to be. And one of the state's early governors, Herbert Hadley, began to promote the place. Then there were several of these large springs that we were talking about that became some of the earliest state parks in Missouri. Big Spring, Alley Spring, and Round Spring.
Now, when did that happen?
That was in the 1920s and the 1930s.
And that was time when that was happening. John, when that happening all over the country, that people were starting to protect lands in the early 20th century?
The federal government started doing that. I think as a state government, Missouri was ahead of the curve in setting up state parks.
Well, that's nice to know that Missouri was actually ahead.
Yeah, not often enough.
Setting the pace,
Exactly.
for protecting land so that they're not overpolluted, not overdeveloped.
Right. Exactly.
We like to think of Missouri as having one of the finest state park systems in Missouri. So these are some of the early places that were important for our state.
Well, one bit of history that I'd add to that also goes back to the 1920s is Aldo Leopold had a cabin along the Current River, and he's, of course, the author of the Scenic County Almanac, and was one of the really giants and pioneers of conservation in this country. And in 1926, he bought a cabin along the Current River, and he spent a series of Christmases there in the cabin with his family before he ended up going on to greater fame at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. And he was also instrumental in starting the whole Missouri Department of Conservation. And so there's a link between the Ozark National Scenic Riverways and our Department of Conservation today, which runs programs all across the state.
That's right. And then, too, people here in St. Louis will know the Post-Dispatch, and one of the early writers back in the 1940s and 1950s was a guy named Leonard Hall.
Leonard Hall, okay.
And he would write from a place that he called his Possum Trot Farm. And a number of his articles that were written for the paper here were about he and his wife's travels and floats on the Current River. And he wrote a very famous book published by the University of Missouri Press called Stars Upstream. That book was one of the first efforts to really put the Current River on a national stage. Then another person who spent time in the Ozarks, Leo A. Dry, lives here in St. Louis, a businessman and a conservationist. He went down to the Ozarks in 1951, bought his first piece of land, and accumulated more than 150,000 acres, most of it in the Current River watershed.
And so you're representing the LAD Foundation.
Correct.
How does that get its name?
Well, the initials are Leo A. Dry. And
so that's dedicated largely to preserving lands in Missouri.
It is. We have a large forest, pioneer forest, managed sustainably, selectively harvested. We're also interested in state parks and national parks. We have 35 miles of frontage on the Current and Jacks Fork rivers in the Ozark National Scenic Riverways, and we have a couple of state parks. So protecting the Current River is a big issue for us. It's an important place. And in addition, in the 1960s, another famous Missourian, Thomas Hart Benton, visited the river on several occasions. He's a well-known painter.
I've certainly heard of Thomas Hart.
Very famous, one of Missouri's sons. And he's famous for murals. You can see some of his work in the Capitol. But he also did some real significant paintings along the Current River. One of those that we like to talk about is at Cave Spring, one of those large springs along the river that create the cool and clear water that people enjoy so much.
So if you see a Thomas Hart Benton painting of a waterway, the chances are very good that that could be the current river.
Chances are it could be the current. He also spent time in Arkansas on the Buffalo River, another national river park.
So that's being protected also.
That's being protected as well. But the very first American river to be protected as a national park is the current.
Mm-hmm. And they've gone on to protect other areas in addition to the current river. Like I've noticed that Missouri has lots of springs. The springs are an important part of feeding the river, and those are protected also, aren't they?
There's a number of springs that are protected. There's 134 miles of the river in the Ozark National Scenic Riverways.
And there's springs up and down the river, from Pull-Tight Spring to Big Spring to Blue Spring to Round Spring to Alley Spring, and they're very tremendous. I really encourage our viewers to go down there and have a look for themselves.
Yeah, every year I go down to the current river, or occasionally to the Jack's Fork, and it's about a 3.5-hour drive. We usually go from St. Louis to Van Buren, and so it's really beautiful to drive down there and to take a look at all of the different. Each year we try to look at a different spring. Pull-Tight Spring is one that I've never been to.
Yeah, I think you got to be on the river to see that one.
You know, you can't just drive up to it. Pull-Tight is something that you have to actually be in a canoe or a john boat to get to.
Yeah, I believe it's the one that comes in from the right bank. So I don't think there's a land way to get there, as far as I know.
Well, that could be a good reason, because we usually take short 5 or 10 mile canoe trips.
Mm-hmm.
One of the interesting stories I think about the park and current river is that it has inspired the efforts to protect other rivers, not just in Missouri, but in the national park system, such as the Buffalo in Arkansas. But just a few years later, after the Ozark National Scenic Riverways was created, that was in 1964, the Wild and Scenic River System was established. So the inspiration and the model for doing that, for protecting rivers for future generations, really started here in Missouri and on the current.
Great. Okay, we're going to take another break, and we're going to see another movie that Tom Malkowicz did, this time about Pull-Tight Spring, which you have to be on the river to see. And then we'll be back in just a minute.
However you want to start.
Welcome back to Green Time. I'm host Don Fitz. This episode we're talking about the Ozark National Scenic Riverways, and with me I have a couple of guests who are very familiar with natural places in Missouri. I have John Hickey with the Sierra Club. John, it's great to have you.
Thanks.
And I also have Greg Iffrig with the LAD Foundation. Okay, we were talking some about the history of the current river, but of course it's all the the riverways in Missouri, are really worth protecting, even if they're not part of the Ozark National Scenic Riverway. What do you do there?
Well, the premier activity is canoeing or kayaking, is floating on the river.
Right.
And one thing I would encourage your viewers to do is to go down and do a float trip, whether it's a short one or a long one.
I have good experience turning over a canoe in the current river. But that's not required, is it?
It's not required, but I've practiced that a couple times as well, and I've got that movement down.
Okay.
But one thing I would
so you might not want to take your iPhone or anything expensive electronic if you are in a canoe.
Exactly, or if you are, put it in what's called a dry bag, and then you can flip to your heart's content. And one thing I would also offer to readers is that Sierra Club volunteers lead outings down on the current in Jacks Fork River. So if someone's thinking, geez, that sounds really cool, I really like that video, but I'm afraid just to do it all by myself, go to our website.
And what is that website?
It's www.missouri.sierraclub.org.
Great.
Easy to remember. Click on the outings page, and we have regular canoe trips down there, so you can go with other Missourians who are experienced and can help you learn the ropes.
It's a really easy river to float down.
Oh yeah, as rivers go,
unless it's been like a really heavy rain and the water's just torrential. But as I remember, there's a few places where you have to steer the canoe carefully. But even if you flip over, of course, if you know how to swim, there's no problem at all.
Exactly, and if you're not the strongest swimmer in the world, you can wear a personal flotation device or PFD, and so I would encourage people to try it.
Yeah, always wear the safety vest anyway, even though I'm an experienced swimmer, because you never know what could happen, and so those are always really make it a lot safer.
Yeah, and it's good modeling if you're canoeing with kids like I am. That how does little Joey keep his on if you don't have yours on?
Absolutely, that's a really good point.
I want to give John and his organization a lot of credit, because on the lands that we have down along the current, your organization and volunteers have been visiting since the 1970s. We've got a long relationship in helping build hiking trails also down in and along that river country, and that's another wonderful way for people to experience this place.
Now you usually don't think about hiking on a river, do you? But hiking and canoeing really go together, don't they?
It does, and one great thing about hiking along a river is water. So if you've gone backpacking, one thing you're always thinking about is where is the water going to be for washing and for cooking and for drinking. And so you've got that aspect of it. It's also obviously very beautiful. The wildlife is attracted to the river, and so it makes for a great trail.
Sometimes the wildlife is attracted to you.
Sometimes, but there's not really too many scary critters down there.
Well, of course, you can sleep overnight on the river too.
Oh, sure.
And the first time that I went on the current, I can't remember if it's the current or the Jacks Fork, people said, well, we'll just leave our ice chest outside. Is that a good idea to do if you're sleeping overnight?
Bad idea, and it's not because of bears, it's raccoons.
Even more raccoons than there are in the city of St. Louis, right?
I have camped on a gravel bar on the current river and had all my gear in 5-gallon pickle buckets, and got woken up in the middle of the night and put on my flashlight and seen a troop of raccoons trying to roll away my 5-gallon bucket, and they couldn't figure out how to get the top off. And so it all ended up well. I threw rocks at them, chased them off, and breakfast was still there in the morning. But, but you got to be prepared for those raccoons.
So you think the raccoons were basically telling you to get up and take the top off that pickle jar so they could have something to eat?
They wished I did, but I didn't.
Well, okay. Well, what else is a good activity for the current of Jacks Fork River?
Well, Greg was mentioning the, hiking and backpacking as an activity. Well, before you can go hiking, you need a trail. Another activity you can do down there is help with trail building.
Really?
As Greg mentioned, the Sierra Club for years has worked with the LAD Foundation, and we have volunteers who go down and both build trails as well as keep up the existing trails.
The trails there don't just magically appear.
Well, when the trees fall down, the raccoons don't saw down the limbs and get them out of the way.
There's a lot of places along a trail where you have a tree sawed and the part removed. And it's also a lot of work to actually build the place where you walk on, and you have to know how you line those boards up or those rocks up to prevent erosion.
There's a tremendous amount of human labor that goes into constructing a trail. But I'll tell you what, it is one of the most soul-satisfying experiences at the end of the day.
Well, I bet you that you have people there who really know how to do it. So if you're working on building a trail, you'd probably learn some tricks. I don't know what to call it, trail architecture, of how to actually build a trail so that to minimize the erosion.
That's correct.
It's true. I've volunteered to be just a worker bee on trail building, but we have volunteers, and I'll mention Bob Gestel by name, who is got a real eye and a real understanding of how to lay out a new trail or how to lay out a new section of a trail if the old section has gotten eroded or is not in a good position.
What about birding? What is birding?
Well, that's another important activity, recreation and sort of a passion for many, many people.
They like to go bird watching.
Members of National Audubon Society, there are chapters around Missouri, here in St. Louis and outlying communities. And the river, because of its age, it's a very old place, and its biodiversity ranks among the highest in the country, is a very, very important place to see birds. In fact, the National Audubon Society has ranked it as an important bird area in America.
Are there any eagles along the river?
You bet.
Okay, so you might have a chance of seeing an eagle. I know if you're staying overnight, you can hear an owl.
You bet. Montauk State Park, which is the headwaters for the Current River, a great place to stay, a great place to see bald eagles and to start a float trip.
And what about swimming?
Wonderful in the summer,
right?
Mainly because of the cool water temperatures.
And so if we get one of those 100-degree days,
head for the current.
In St. Louis, or any part of Missouri, that's a good place to go to.
And one thing I like to do with swimming is snorkeling.
Oh,
People
really?
think of snorkeling as you got to go down to the Caribbean or somewhere. If you snorkel in the Current or the Jack's Fork, you will be shocked at how colorful the fish are. They're tremendous.
I have never done that, but I just know from when I'm going down canoeing, I see all these turtles jumping into the water as the canoe goes by the rock.
Oh yeah.
And so there's okay. We just have a little bit of time, John. If you were to leave people with an impression, in about 30 seconds, what do you think would be a good summary statement to say about the Current River?
Well, the motto of the Sierra Club is explore, enjoy, and protect. And we believe that the more Missourians who go down to the Current and Jack's Fork and explore it and enjoy it for themselves, they will be motivated to protect that resource for future generations.
Okay, and so that's a really important part of it. When you're there, you don't want to throw your beer cans, and especially you don't want to throw breakable glass bottles into the river or on the banks. And if you see them, you want to pick them up.
Exactly.
Great. Okay, Greg, what do you think would be the most memorable thing to say, you would want to leave viewers with?
Oh, I don't know. I think the Current River may be responsible for some of the greatest memories that families across Missouri have of floating the river, swimming in the water, camping on the gravel bar, cooking breakfast in the morning mist. It's just a wonderful, wonderful place.
Okay. Now, let me ask you this. Is it a good idea to take your recreational vehicle into the river?
Well, no. I think their recreational vehicles are fine. People drive their cars and motorized vehicles down to the park, and there are campgrounds that you can...
Okay, Greg, I'm getting the wrap-up sign, so I want to thank John Hickey. I want to thank Greg Iffrig for coming to the show. I want to thank all of our viewers, and please tune in to the next episode of Green Time.